Hi, I'm David Bonasera, and you're watching Environmental Concerns.
Hi, I'm David Bonasera, and this is Environmental Concerns. Folks, I have a real treat for you, whether you like it or not. Tonight we have a very special guest, Lenny Siegel. And who is Lenny Siegel, you're going to ask? Well, aside that he's from Mountain View in Silicon Valley, very, very concerned citizen and activist. He has testified in front of the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. But the biggest thing is that he is what I would closely call an expert as far as on vapor intrusion. What is vapor intrusion? You're going to find out, and you're going to want to know. If you even care about your children one little bit, you're not even going to want to turn the channel. You're going to want to hang on to this because this is going to be really, really important. We're also going to be talking about at Moffett Field, Hangar 1. And so we have a picture of it on the set. We're going to be talking about that because that is also an issue, and that goes back to some of the building materials that were used way back when and didn't really know that they were that dangerous until now. But there's a lot of interesting stuff, folks, and this is something I don't think anybody's ever brought up, and you really need to know. Hang on, we'll be right back. Folks, we're back, and again, we're with Lenny Siegel. Lenny, thank you for being here so much. I really, really appreciate it. The 8 years I've been doing this, we have never talked about these particular issues. Mm-hmm. But the first one I want to talk about is about Hangar 1.
Okay.
Tell us a little bit what's going on there, because people have heard about it, they don't know quite what's going on. I know if you go to the EPA and you talk about certain things like vapor intrusion or what's happening there, the EPA is just going to run hand right off to you, which is...
Okay, well, Hangar 1 is like one of the world's largest buildings. It's been around since the 1930s. It was built to house the dirigible, the USS Macon, which was so large it was an aircraft carrier in the air. And it's a pretty remarkable building, and it was turned over to NASA Ames Research Center when the Navy pulled out of Moffett Field, and everybody's been looking forward to some sort of museum or educational center being built there. Unfortunately, as part of the investigations of contamination in the wetlands at Moffett Field, NASA discovered unique contaminants there that they traced back to the hangar. A kind of PCB, polychlorinated biphenyl, is actually built into the siding and the roof of the hangar.
That's very nasty stuff.
Yeah, it's very nasty stuff, and it's leaching into the environment. And NASA's been doing sampling inside the building, and they found so much PCBs in the air inside the building that they closed the building. So it's a major environmental problem, and the Navy, who owned it at the time that the problem occurred, is responsible for dealing with it. Unfortunately, the Navy is proposing its two major options for dealing with the problem are, one, to demolish the hangar, and secondly, or to remove all the siding with no plans for reconstruction. So in response, a group of us from the Mountain View, actually from the whole Bay Area, have gotten together. Includes environmentalists such as myself, retired Navy pilots, historic preservationists, aviation buffs, and all gotten together to say, save Hangar 1, because there's no reason that one has to destroy such a unique structure just to clean it up. It can be rebuilt, it can be cleaned up or coated in a way that the Bay Area, the Silicon Valley, will retain one of its most valued landmarks, and that not only the wetlands but the air inside the hangar is safe.
So it can be safe then? I mean,
we think so. It's a matter of government agencies willing to pony up the money and the Navy to take responsibility and to consider reconstruction of this National Historic Landmark. It's on the National Registry of Historic Places, that they can use their cleanup money to do that.
How does the government want to resolve this problem?
Well, under the process that we're facing now, the Navy wants to make a quick decision, and it wants to do it in a way that doesn't guarantee that the building will be there. They are supposed to release an engineering evaluation, cost analysis for the cleanup of the hangar. They've delayed it under pressure from the community. The community's been saying, we want you to look at all the options and to do what you can to preserve the building. And we've gotten the Navy to slow down a little bit, but it's going to take a lot more pressure because they just don't want to spend the money on a building that's not theirs anymore.
Okay, what does the Committee for Saving Hangar 1 say?
What we're saying is we want a complete study looking at all the options. We want it done slowly enough to try to find the money to reconstruct it. If they can't figure out a way to coat it to contain the contamination in place, then we aren't against removing the siding and the roof as long as they're replaced. And the Navy, NASA, the private foundation which plans to build an educational there called Space World have to get together and line up all of the resources, all the moving parts, so that by the time they get around to removing the contamination, we know that the building won't just deteriorate from neglect.
Now, this was from just building materials that, I mean, when you have stuff like asbestos and PCBs, when they had those building, they didn't really know that it was that
That's
bad.
right. This was the 1930s, like around 1932. They called the commercial name for the product was called galbestos. It's got lead paint, it's got asbestos, it's PCBs, things that you wouldn't want to go near these days, but it's built into the building. And it's difficult for the Navy and the environmental regulators, US EPA and the Regional Water Quality Control Board, to deal with it because it is unusual that the source of environmental contamination would actually be a big building as opposed to a dump site or a leaking underground storage tank. And they're having trouble dealing with the rules. The Navy's been saying, we aren't authorized to clean the inside of the building. And everybody else has said, yes, you are. It's because this building is leaching very dangerous contaminants into our local environment.
Okay. What can the people do?
Well, what you can do...
I mean, most of the time people just sit there and go, well, gee, I don't know what to do. What can we do? And they sitting on their hands waiting for somebody else to do something.
What we've been doing is circulating petitions. We collected 1,700 names at a couple of art and wine festivals over the last few weekends. We're going to public meetings. The Navy's required to hold public meetings as part of the remediation of Hangar 1. And we're getting people out, getting them to write their members of Congress and senators. And you don't have to know all the technical details about the Superfund process, and you don't have to know the difference between Aerochlor 1268 and some other form of PCB. You just have to know that we want this place cleaned up, and we want it cleaned in a way that preserves the hangar.
Because I know there are encapsulants, which is part of my background. But what about, is there encapsulants for PCBs?
There are encapsulants. The kind that they've used thus far didn't last long enough, but then they only coated the outside and not the inside, so we aren't sure how well it performed. But I think a lot of us believe, and NASA believes, that they would rather get rid of the PCBs, not leave them there. And I'm okay with that, as long as we know that the building's going to be rebuilt.
And they have good containment while they're cleaning.
I'm pretty confident that with the oversight that we have at Moffett Field, and the Navy actually has a good record, like when they remove contaminated dirt, they cover it, they build a platform to contain the water. They have a fairly good process of doing it, but they're under a lot of pressure from headquarters not to spend large amounts of money, and they're coming up with these rulings like not cleaning the inside, or we can't use money on reconstruction, that are getting in the way of the solution. We think it's just a simple matter of having the political pressure placed on the Navy to make sure that they deal with it. And if they deal with it, I think we can make sure they do it right.
Now, is this some of the stuff just airborne, or is some of the stuff getting into the ground too?
Well, it goes into the water that is flowing toward the bay. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the reason they know about this problem is because the wetlands at Moffett Field, the stormwater retention pond, have PCBs in them, and we've been fighting for several years to get those cleaned to a level that would allow tidal restoration. We've won that battle, but in order for them to go ahead and do that cleanup, the Navy is claiming they have to deal with the source. Well, they have to deal with the source, and they have to deal with the cleanup. I'm not sure about the order. There is a settling basin that removes the PCBs on the way to the wetlands. So I'm not sure they have to delay the wetlands cleanup. But they do have to clean the source if we're going to have long-term protection. The best way is to get rid of the contaminants, but again, we have to figure out how feasible that is in a way that would retain the hangar. This is an enormous structure. You drive down 101, you don't have to drive down 101. You see it from miles and miles away. It housed at like a 700-foot dirigible. It rains inside. It is an enormous, unique structure. It's got value. Historically, it has value for its future use, and it's not going to take that much to clean it up if the Navy decides that they want to do it. It'll cost a little bit of money, but they'll never build something like this again. There's another
No, never
structure
will.
just like it in Ohio. It has problems too, but this is something that if it were one of 100, maybe, but it's one of 2 in the world. This kind of hanger, it's unique, and they could do things in the 30s when they didn't have all the laws we have now in a way they can't do them now.
Actually, between the environmental reports and everything else, and it would nobody get anything done.
They built the Empire State Building, the Golden Gate Bridge, Hangar 1 at Moffett. These were all done rather quickly and efficiently. A lot of people died or were hurt in the process. And so we changed the laws and made it harder to do it. And so one of the things you have to do is watch out for what you can't do again.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about vapor intrusion.
Sure.
Tell us what it is, because the folks out there have not a clue. Talk about it, because this is something that we really need to open our eyes on.
Well, vapor intrusion is the process through which subsurface contaminants, such as trichloroethylene, perchloroethylene, those are solvents, dry cleaning substances, move from the contaminated groundwater or contaminated soil directly up into buildings. It vaporizes. It can even go through. It vaporizes. It can even go through concrete.
Like radon.
It's just like radon, except it's not radioactive. It is a toxic substance, or these are a family of toxic substances that many of which cause cancer, liver disease, and other health problems. The problem with it overall is that when we started looking at groundwater contamination here in Silicon Valley, you have something like 29 Superfund sites here in the valley. We started looking at that. We got the government to take action fairly quickly in the 1980s to protect our drinking water. So once we knew about the problem, we weren't drinking these contaminants in our drinking water. We're cleaning the water, and we're getting water from elsewhere. Unfortunately, in places where people are living or working above these substances, and there are a number of sites in Mountain View, including Moffett Field again, people are actually breathing the contamination. And the difficulty with airborne contamination, and I'm sure you've dealt with this before, is it's a lot harder to get alternate air. That is, if you know that your drinking water in your home is contaminated, you can get bottled water, you can get a new pipe to your house. There are ways you can do that. It's a lot harder to get alternate air. My mother's on oxygen. That's not very practical for the thousands of people that are potentially impacted by this in Mountain View, and hundreds of thousands probably around the country. So vapor intrusion is a direct pathway from contaminated shallow groundwater or contaminated soil into people's homes or workplaces. So people are breathing volatile contaminants, many of which cause cancer, and it's something that only in the last few years have regulatory agencies started to recognize as a serious problem. So there are places in this country, including Mountain View, where people have been breathing these contaminants at unsafe levels for decades. So it's urgent that we identify and remediate these problems.
We're going to go to a public service announcement, and we're going to get more into vapor intrusion. Folks, you really want to hang on, and the reason why is because in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of you dumped your oil into the side yards or into the backyards before there was any EPA standards as far as what to do and what not to do. And the thing is everybody's buying and selling houses in Silicon Valley here, and then your kids go and play in the yard and you have no idea what the dirt is and how much contaminants it is. And that's why we're talking to you tonight. Hang tight.